War Cabinet Member Benny Gantz's ultimatum last night, Saturday night, means that the Biden administration's effort to overthrow the Israeli government is moving into high gear. Question is, why are they doing it now, and what are the stakes involved in all of this? I'll have details about all of those questions coming up on In Focus. So just 3 days after Defense Minister Yoav Gallant gave his ultimatum to Prime Minister Netanyahu, agreed that the Palestinian Authority will take over Gaza or all is lost, and so aligned his position with that of the Biden administration. Minister with that portfolio and War Cabinet member, former Defense Minister Benny Gantz, came in with his own announcement. At a press conference on Saturday night, Gantz gave an ultimatum to the prime minister. He said, meet my conditions by June 8th, or I take my center-left party, the stateliness party, out of the government and end the emergency government and bring you back to a 64-seat government, and I will seek to overthrow that as quickly as possible. So what was it exactly in Benny Gantz's ultimatum? My colleague, Michael Doran from the Hudson Institute, very helpfully translated Benny Gantz's ultimatum into English, and I'm just going to put it here, and we're going to go through the items one by one. So the first two items on Benny Gantz's ultimatum seem fairly reasonable. They're the same ultimatum or the same goals that Gantz and Gallant and Netanyahu agreed to. The first two were goals, as they set out in October, shortly after they formed the war cabinet, when Benny Gantz brought his center party or center-left party into the government after October 7th. So the first two conditions of his ultimatum are bring home the hostages and topple the rule of Hamas, demilitarize the Gaza Strip, and ensure Israeli security control. That doesn't seem to be a problem at all. Number 3 is a big problem, and number 5 is a big problem, and number 4 is sort of an impossibility in light of 3 and 5. So let's just first of all go to number 4. Number 4 is return the Israeli residents of the north to their homes by September 1 and revitalize life in the Western Negev. All right, so Yoav Zaytoun, one of the military commentators or correspondents for Yediot Ahronot newspaper, just posted this very long post on Twitter today with video that he had taken. He spent the past couple of weeks with IDF forces from the Golani Brigade and Tank Brigade number 188 in the north. And he came back with one hell of a story about what's actually happening in the far north that used to be everybody's vacation land and an integral part of Israel. So since October 7th, as most of you know, or right after October 7th, Israel evacuated about between 60 and 80,000 of its citizens from their homes in the border communities abutting Lebanon. That's because Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy that controls Lebanon, has deployed its forces, tens of thousands of them, in what they call their Radwan brigades, to Israel's border. The Radwan brigades are actually residents of the villages in South Lebanon, and they operate from within their own homes when they plot their attacks against Israel, when they observe Israeli positions and shoot at Israeli convoys, etc., etc. I think we've spoken about this in the past, but following the 2006 war with Hezbollah, Israel destroyed a lot of buildings in South Lebanon. And in the reconstruction effort that Hezbollah carried out after the war was over with Iran's money and direction, all of the new built homes that replaced the ones that were destroyed during the war were built with missile roofs inside, not with shelters, but with actual missile roofs, so that they all became, all of the apartments, all of the homes that were built after 2006, the last war in Lebanon, were built as offensive positions against Israel for missile launches, for drone launches, for rocket launches, etc. So the actual homes in Lebanon were preconceived as launching pads for missiles, and the residents of these apartments, of these towns, are members of Hezbollah's elite Radwan brigades. They're, veterans of the wars in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and now they're all waiting to invade Israel. So knowing that the Radwan brigades were poised along the border with Israel, the government wisely said, well, we can't have a much larger repeat of what happened in the border communities with Gaza just now on October 7th. So around October 8th, 9th, 10th, Israel started very quickly evacuating the civilians in northern Israel from their homes along the border with Lebanon so that they wouldn't be overrun and we wouldn't see October 7th to the nth degree in northern Israel, because Hezbollah is much more powerful than Hamas. And we saw how much damage Hamas could do with the power that it had aggregated over the years since Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. So it was a wise decision in my view, and also it requires the government to actually take action against Hezbollah, because we need to have our residents go home. We need the buffer zone to be as it was until Ehud Barak, the worst prime minister probably in Israeli history, removed all IDF forces from our security zone inside of South Lebanon, and so protected the north. He removed everybody, said we can play Chicken Little. That's our new strategy. We're going to build a big fence and everything will be okay. It totally failed immediately, but that's another story for another day. So we removed our forces from our border zone, from our buffer zone inside of South Lebanon on May 31st, 2000. And now in May 2024, we have built the Hezbollah basically has a security zone inside of Israel where all of the civilians are no longer able to live in their homes. And Hezbollah has been picking out, destroying both strategic targets belonging to the Air Force and other forces in Israel with their anti-tank rockets that move so quickly and at such a low trajectory that you get no prior warning before they explode, and we have no ability to intercept them. So they've been attacking strategic Air Force air control balloons and other things for the past many months, and it's really, really apparently caused damage. And they're also destroying civilian homes one by one, and they threaten all the military convoys and civilians who are trying to drive along the border region in areas like Kiryat Shmona and all the kibbutzim and other areas in the north, and even going down to the Western Galilee and, of course, the Golan Heights. So the whole area, which is the most beautiful, in my opinion, area of Israel, is now not only depopulated, but it's also very dangerous for IDF forces. Zaytun's report from northern Israel showed that Israel had basically transformed this its primary tourist area, for at least for Israelis, into just a line of fortifications, not only along the border, but also further back in anticipation of an invasion from Lebanon. So rather than being in an offensive posture, we're in a defensive posture, which obviously is untenable in the long term, but that's where we are today. And why are we in that position today? Because the Biden administration is imposing arms embargoes on Israel and isolating Israel in the international community, so that if we're forced to carry out a ground invasion of Lebanon, which I think everybody assumes we will be because there's no other way around it unless we totally capitulate to Hezbollah, then we're going to be doing it with only basically the arms that we can produce ourselves. And so we want to delay it, I think, as long as possible. So Benny Gantz's demand that people be allowed to go home in September basically is saying we want to capitulate to all of Hezbollah's demands for quiet in the north and just render the north, again, an entire area of the country that's at the mercy of Hezbollah and its ground forces in the south, and of course its massive missile, rocket, and drone arsenal that are larger than most countries in the entire world. In fact, it's larger than anything that the European countries have. So just to get a sense of the dimensions of the threat. So that's what Hezbollah is demanding, and Gantz's demand that people be allowed to go home by September 1st effectively means he wants to capitulate to Hezbollah in the north, which brings us to the third and fifth demand. So the third demand that he gave was establish an American, European, Arab, Palestinian civil administration that will manage civilian affairs in Gaza and lay the foundation for an alternative in the future that is neither Hamas nor Abbas, Abbas being the head of the Palestinian Authority that the United States funds and arms and trains and provides massive political support for at the UN and really everywhere else in the world. So he's saying oh, the Israeli people don't like Abbas, so I don't like Abbas either. The Americans are sort of dealing with that, and they're trying to push Abbas out and bring in, other fig leaves for Hamas. So he's saying do this. Now, a couple of things on this. So he talks about Arab, European, and American forces, along with Palestinian forces who would take over civil governance of Gaza. So this is, not to put too fine a point on it, a total joke, right? Because right now, no European country rightly has said that they're going to bring forces into the area, because why would they? I mean, they remember what happened to the French paratroopers in Beirut in 1983. They were blown to smithereens, just like the Marine forces and just like the French embassy and just like the U.S. embassy were by the precursors of Hamas, of Hezbollah, the Amal militia in Beirut. So they're not thrilled with the idea of going into Gaza, so that's the Europeans. Say the Europeans, they're not going to go in. Now, what about the Americans? Well, the Biden administration already has forces on the ground. They built this pier to supply Hamas with whatever it wants, and to try to seize control over the maritime border of Gaza from Israel by putting in this American presence that's there to try to undermine Israel's military operations and to take away Israel's ability to impose a maritime blockade of the Gaza coast going forward. But that's, right now what they're doing is they're bringing in supposedly humanitarian aid so that the Americans can stop, propagating their blood libels that Israel is deliberately starving the Palestinians. It's all just a propaganda political warfare campaign against Israel. And also, in the longer term, it's a means to undermine Israel's ability to control Hamas, to control Gaza militarily, among other things, by controlling the coastline, because this is going to be some sort of a U.S. enclave inside of Gaza that Israel has to enable to work with limited Israeli control over the area. So, it's like when I was younger, I think my first apartment after I met Aliyah, and I was living in Tel Aviv, and my parents came to visit me. I was in the Army, and I was showing them very proudly that all of the windows on my first floor apartment had windows, had bars on them so that people couldn't break in. And then I had this one balcony that didn't have bars on it. So my father went in there and he said, "But there are no bars here." And I said, "Yeah, but there are everywhere else." And he said, "Yes, but the fact that there aren't here means that it doesn't matter that you have them anywhere else." So it's the same kind of thing where, the Americans are undermining Israel's ability to control Gaza militarily with this pier, because they're saying, even if Israel is able to seize control over the international border with Egypt against America's wishes through the current operation in Rafah, the United States is going to undermine Israel's ability to control the coastline with this pier. So that's what the Americans are doing on the ground in Gaza. At any rate, back to the issue of the multinational force. So Senator Cruz very helpfully is already saying that this has to be done under the War Powers Act, and that it has to be authorized by Congress, and that it was unlawful for the Biden administration to go forward with this pier project because it's already been attacked by Hamas twice, and it's placing U.S. forces and their lives in danger. And this is something that Congress has to authorize. And so it's unconstitutional to even send them there. And he's linking that to other things that the Biden administration wants. So we'll have to see what happens going forward. He's a great friend of Israel. Right now, it's really a question. So is Congress going to allow the Biden administration to send U.S. forces to Gaza in order to seize control from Israel? That's basically a redux of what the Americans did in 1983 in Beirut. I've written about this in the past, and I'll try to link some of my old articles to this post so that you can see it. But basically, the idea in Beirut in 1983 was that the United States thought that they could come in and replace and force Israel out of Beirut, and then sort of somehow or another be peacekeeping forces inside of Beirut, because all of the warring factions in the Lebanese war in the country in 1982, they were only fighting because Israel had invaded. It was a stupid American concept that, by the way, has been maintained throughout, that the only problem in the Middle East is Israel, and so if Israel withdraws, then everything will be fine. That was the American concept in Beirut, and what actually happened, as inevitably always happens, is that the United States came in, the IDF left the city of Beirut, and all of the forces that were supporting Israel, the South Lebanese militias, some of the Druze, they all thought that the Americans were on their side, and all of the forces, the Syrian forces, the PLO forces, the Shiite forces directed by Iran, that were Amal, the precursor of Hezbollah, they were all treating the United States forces, the Marines, as Israelis, and they were getting attacked and they were getting ambushed until they blew up the American embassy, and then later the Marine barracks in the largest terror attack the United States suffered in its history until 9/11. So that's what happened in Beirut, and it would, of course, happen in Gaza because Hamas is a group of sadistic monsters and nut jobs who just want to kill people. So that would happen to the Americans as well. And so I can't really see an easy authorization of such an operation by Congress. But so that means no Europeans, no Americans. What are we left with? We're left with the Arabs. So over the last week, the moderate Arabs that the United States claims are going to come in as a moderate peacekeeping forces said that they would send forces into Gaza only if they could have international forces also in Judea and Samaria, if the United States recognized the state of Palestine, if the UN accepts Palestine as a full member in the body, so that they're talking about basically using any Arab agreement to come in and do anything related to civil affairs in Gaza to that. And so if that happens, of course, that is a massive strategic defeat for Israel. And if the United States went along with it, I don't know how any Israeli government would respond, but it would be a disaster for Israel, which leaves the Palestinians. The Palestinians are interesting. And then, a lot of experts say that the Arabs will come in anyway because nobody wants to be in the crosshairs of Hamas. So then that leaves the Palestinians. So the United States has this idea, I think I spoke about it in the last show, that they're going to give a hechsher, they're going to, kasher the Hamas's external leadership that's living in Qatar. And to that end, they've been putting out all of these statements. My friend Lee Smith wrote about a very important article in Tablet magazine last week, where, basically what they're saying is we're going to send Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind on October 7th, the commander of Hamas on the ground in Gaza. We're going to sacrifice him. We're going to help Israel find him. But in exchange, but at the same time, we're legitimizing all of the Hamas terrorists living in Qatar. And we're going to say, and so American officials are putting out to the media in the United States, look, Yahya Sinwar is really bad, but Ismail Haniyeh and Abu Marzouk and all of these other mass murderers who are yucking it up in Qatar, they're really moderate, and they never would have authorized October 7th. It's too destabilizing. They just want to live well, and they want economic development in Gaza. This is all complete and utter crap, but it doesn't matter. That's what the Americans are saying. Why are they saying it? Because in order to bring in the Palestinian Authority, which the United States likes as a fig leaf that likes to pretend that it's an ostensible peace partner to Israel or moderate or whatever, the only way they can do that is if Hamas is part of the PA. So Hamas, the only way that they might allow for the Palestinian Authority to come in and be their fig leaf in Gaza is if they are part of the PA. So they actually control it. So the United States' idea of a revitalized Palestinian Authority is that it's going to be governed by a bunch of technocrats who get appointed by who? By the members of the PLO. Hamas, all of the moderates living in Qatar, are going to join the PLO, which is sort of the mother organization of the Palestinian Authority, and they're going to become component parts of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. It's the architect of modern terrorism. And they're going to join the PLO, and then from the PLO, they're going to appoint the members of the technocratic government that's going to rule Gaza. And apropos the U.S. expectation and the Arabs' demand, they're going to also they're going to form the basis of the leadership of Palestine that's going to be recognized by the UN and by the Biden administration before November. So the whole idea of bringing in the Palestinians is to form a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria in Gaza with tentacles reaching into Jerusalem, with Israel's sovereignty over its capital city unraveling before our very eyes, and it's going to be controlled by Hamas. And this is the model that the United States has embraced in Lebanon, because in Lebanon, you have Hezbollah, which has its representatives in the Lebanese government, in the Lebanese parliament. They control the government, they control the parliament, they control the military, and the United States pretends that it doesn't, and that all of these bodies are actually legitimate state institutions that Hezbollah doesn't control. But Hezbollah appoints the government. You can't appoint the government without Hezbollah's approval, which means that the government operates at Hezbollah's pleasure. The army is the same way. So exactly the situation in Lebanon, where the United States is constantly denying that Hezbollah controls the entire country and uses it as just a forward operating base in this war against Israel. So the United States wants to pretend away the fact that Hamas will win this war, that it's in charge of Gaza under a fig leaf of Palestinian Authority, which just as Hezbollah controls the government of Lebanon, so Hamas will control the revitalized Palestinian Authority. It will be extended from Gaza into Jenin and Samaria, and that will form a sort of the nucleus for massive international pressure led by the Biden administration for Israel to capitulate in Judea and Samaria, and of course it already had in Gaza. So Benny Gantz's demand here for establishing an American, European, Arab, Palestinian civil administration that will manage civilian affairs in the Gaza Strip and to lay the foundation for an alternative in the future that is neither Hamas nor Abbas is just Hamas. That's all it is. This means total Israeli capitulation to the Americans' war aims, which of course are aligned with Hamas's war aims. So that's a disaster. And then 5 that we were talking about that's related to 3 is promote normalization with Saudi Arabia as part of a comprehensive move that will create an alliance with the free world and the Arab world against Iran. So this is also a problem because Gantz afterwards clarified that the Saudis have said that they demand that in exchange for normalization that Israel announce its support for the establishment of a Palestinian state. So intrinsic or inherent in this demand by Gantz is a demand that Israel accept Palestinian statehood. So after the Prime Minister's office rebutted his ultimatum and pointed out that that's what he's gunning for, Gantz denied it and said there's no real Saudi demand for Israel to recognize a Palestinian state. So this is not true. This is completely untrue, in fact. And what was notable here was that the State Department's mouthpiece, which is Israeli reporter Barak Ravid, who works for Axios website, he tweeted out almost immediately after Gantz sent out his clarification following the Prime Minister's office's rebuttal of his statement. Barak Ravid sent out this tweet, which was funny because it said, this is a lie. Like the Saudi Arabians, they made their demand explicit that the Prime Minister of Israel must both orally and in writing support the establishment of a Palestinian state. And not only does he have to do that, it's not just a declarative thing. The Prime Minister has to link his support, again, that he expresses both formally in writing and orally, to a timeline. When is the state going to be established? So the Saudis are absolutely clear that normalization with Saudi Arabia means the establishment of a Palestinian state, or at a minimum, Israel's acceptance of the establishment of a Palestinian state. And given the enthusiasm and the urgency with which the Biden administration views the accomplishment of this goal, it's really just a UN admission of a state called Palestine as a full member, and American Biden administration recognition of the state of Palestine, opening up a Palestinian embassy in Washington, opening up an American embassy in Palestine, wherever that is. So that's what the Americans want to do as quickly as possible. And then let me just turn this off. I keep thinking that I'm doing it without looking at my phone, and it never works. So let me just do it now. If I can. Here we go. All right, I'm done. Anyway, so the Saudi normalization thing is just a way, again, to capitulate to the American demand that Israel accepts a Palestinian state. Now, it's true that the Biden administration was really keen to get this normalization deal so that they can, be in line for a Nobel Prize or just an awesome signing ceremony before November 7th, before the elections. And the problem here is twofold. One is that the Saudis wanted a treaty. They want it to be ratified. And right now they're playing ball with the administration and screwing Israel because they believe that they're going to get ratification in the Senate of a normalization deal if they have, of a military pact with the United States. They want their demand, basically normalization with Israel is this price that they have to pay in order to get a mutual defense treaty with the United States and to get access to nuclear enrichment, meaning they think that this is a pathway to a nuclear bomb, and also to a mutual defense treaty with the United States. So both of these things, in order to happen, have to be ratified by the Senate. And the Saudis are under the impression that, if this is a Biden treaty, then all of the Democrats will vote for it, and you'll be able to get enough Republicans on board for the deal to get it passed through, ratified in the Senate. You have 50 Democrats, you need 66 to pass, you need 2/3 majority. So the Americans have led the Saudis to believe that they'll have 16 Republicans voting for this. Now, if this deal is coming at the expense of capitulation of Israel to American demands, I don't know that that's likely, but let's just put that aside. At any rate, that's what the fifth demand in his ultimatum is about. And finally, as the sixth one, adopt a general outline regarding reform of the military draft that will result in all Israelis serving the state and contributing to the national effort. That's just, whatever, to make himself look good politically, but and other things that I don't want to get into, but that's just nothing. So, the real question. So the ultimatum was that if Netanyahu doesn't accept all of these terms, which are just capitulation and Palestinian statehood, continued Hamas control over Gaza, etc., and capitulation, as I pointed out, to Hezbollah in the north, then Gantz says that he's going to leave the government and he's going to work to oust the government from power in a no-confidence vote. And he wants to have a unity government after that. So either go to elections or have what we've talked about in the past, which is this constructive no confidence, where he'll get 61 members of Knesset to vote no confidence in Netanyahu, and also at the same time say that they support him taking over and being the new prime minister of Israel. So until recently, I thought that was a possibility, except then last night, Saturday night, Israel Beitenu party leader, Yvette Lieberman, who's the wild card of Israeli politics. He's on the left, but he's on the right, but he toppled Netanyahu and he went with the left. He was a member of the Bennett-Lapid coalition with the Muslim Brotherhood. So he's like one of these guys who is a weather vane and of public opinion on the one hand, and on the other hand, of self-interest. You can always depend on him to do what's best for Yvette. So Lieberman said last night on Israel's version of Meet the Press that he will not join a government that is supported, that has the Muslim Brotherhood involved with it. So the Muslim Brotherhood Party, Brown, if they're in, then Lieberman will not be a member of government, which means that the constructive no confidence vote can't happen. That is, Gantz can't form an alternative government with, say, 5 defectors from Likud and Lieberman, and it's possible that others, breakaway right-wingers like Gideon Sa'ar and his party, won't join such a capitulationist government. So it doesn't seem that he would have it. So what would be the point of leaving the government? So that's one thing. And then the question is, well, if he doesn't have an alternative government set up by June 8th, then would he get 5 defectors from Likud to have a no-confidence vote? You would probably need more than that so that they could run as a separate list from Likud, because they wouldn't get reelected in Likud. So it would be hard to see them. I mean, they have Gallant for sure, and probably Yuli Edelstein, another Likud MK who hates Netanyahu. But finding another 3 would be more difficult now that Lieberman said that he just wants to go to new elections. So maybe, probably not. But say they are able to oust Netanyahu from power, and let's just say they do, and say that they don't. So if they do, and this brings us, first of all, to the question of June 8th. Why did he set this 3 weeks deadline for Netanyahu? So if the government falls on June 8th, then a couple of things happen. One is the war ends and we lose. And another thing that happens, but it's over, and the Biden administration just wants the war over. They want the war over, and I'll get to the last part of this dialogue. They want Iran essentially to win, and they want to do it as quickly as possible. So from their perspective, ousting Netanyahu from power, bringing down his government is critical because that'll end the war, and then they can get the end of the war on Iran's terms, and that will just make them very happy. So that's one thing. If that happens, if it doesn't happen, if it's just Gallant, the defense minister, and Benny Gantz that leave, then they have another thing, which is the election calendar. So if June 8th is before the first presidential debate, and by removing Gallant and Gantz's party from the government, bringing down the emergency government, reducing the governing coalition from 64 to 63 seats, because Gallant will have left, or 62 if Edelstein also leaves. So then you have a situation where Biden can defend against attacks by Trump over his deeply hostile positions on Israel by saying it's not just an American policy, that this is the view of all sane Israelis. See, look, these centrist politicians, including Gallant from Netanyahu's own Likud party and Gantz and his party that came in to form this war cabinet, they said they just can't handle it anymore. It's not an American thing. It's an Israeli thing. We're just going with the sane Israelis, and as we push forward to try to coerce Israel into capitulating to Hamas, to Iran, to Hezbollah, etc. So that's very key. It's an election calendar concept. And the other thing is that at the same time, all of the anarchists in Israel on the left who have been running this color revolution against Netanyahu, for lack of a better term, to oust his government from power, to set Israel on fire so long as they continue to govern, that started 10 months before the Hamas invasion on October 7th, they are now renewing their color revolution in Israel. So their statements by leaders of this anarchist movement have been that they're going to start bringing the country to a standstill on May 20th. They've already started today. They're having these convoys of cars driving as slow as the law permits along all of the highways to block normal life from taking place in Israel. Their goal is to place massive pressure on members of Knesset from the coalition by staking them out outside of their house and harassing them everywhere they go, just as we saw they did throughout 2023, in order to extort them into voting no confidence in the government by June 8th. So before Benny Gantz gave his ultimatum, they had already said that their target date for bringing down the government is June 8th. So the other thing about June 8th is that if you do get a no confidence vote passed in the government by June 8th, then you will have Israeli elections a month before the American elections. And then they're hoping that they get a left-wing government installed, 3 months after we've capitulated to Hamas because of the no confidence vote, before the U.S. elections. And then even if Biden loses and Trump will come in and you'll have this quisling Israeli government, and he's not going to be able to trade horses with them because they're going to be completely beholden to the defeated but on fire Democratic Party in the United States. So that's the basic concept that we're facing here. Now, and Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, is one of the ringleaders of this whole color revolution in Israel and capitulationist doctrine of the Americans in relation to Israel and Hamas. He's coming to Israel today, the 19th of May, in order to try to push Gallant and Gantz to leave the government and to undermine the operation that's being carried out now in Rafah, to block it from achieving its goal, which is the cutoff of the international border area for Hamas and destroying Hamas's remaining conventional forces, the 4 battalions that are there, and finding more hostages. We found the bodies of 4 hostages, only one of whom we knew already was dead, Shani Luke, and the 3 others we had no confirmation of their death. We found them as well. So that's 4 that have already been found. We found 50 tunnels that traverse from Rafah into Egypt underground. So we're already at the beginning, still in the outskirts of Rafah, seeing the dimensions of the underground city that Hamas operated, or I should say superhighway of terrorist war material, terrorist personnel between Egypt and Gaza. So we're also seeing the dimensions of Egypt's hostility towards Israel, and really reaching the point where we're discovering, and I want to do a separate story on this just about Egypt, that Egypt, even more than Iran and Qatar, may well have been in recent years Hamas's most important state sponsor, because all of the weapons that Hamas had, the rockets, the missiles, et cetera, and the RPGs and the Kalashnikov rifles and the hand grenades and everything else that they used on October 7th and since, all came in from Egypt, or they got the materials to build them themselves in Gaza through these subterranean tunnels that link Gaza to the Sinai Peninsula through the Rafah area. So Israel's already finding this out. God only knows what else we're going to discover as we go forward in Rafah. So Jake Sullivan wants to interrupt and end prematurely the operation in Rafah so that we don't discover everything that we have to find out about the nature of the war that we're fighting, both from the American side and the Egyptian side, and also so that we don't achieve our war goals of seizing the international border, destroying Hamas's remaining conventional forces, and finding more and more of the hostages that are being hidden in Rafah, either dead or alive, and of course Hamas's terror masters, many of whom are holed up in Rafah in these tunnels that we've already discovered. So this is why Jake Sullivan is coming, to push them to leave the government and to block the continued operation of IDF forces inside of the city of Rafah. Will he succeed? So, look, why don't we actually get to that in a second? Because one of the things that I said and I had alluded to is Iran. So what's going on with Iran? So the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, a man named Rafael Grossi, was just in Iran last week. And he came back at the end of the week and he spoke to reporters. I think it was in London on June 14th, after he met with David Cameron, the British Foreign Secretary. So Rafael Grossi said we're getting no participation. The Iranians are not cooperating with us, with our inspectors. We haven't had any real inspections in Iran since 2022, so for 2 years. We assess there's all this loose talk, he referred to it as loose talk, by Iranian leaders saying that they may well just, build nuclear weapons, because why not at this point? And he said he's very alarmed by this loose talk, and that given the level of uranium enrichment that they've reached of 60% and moving towards 90%, that Iran looks like it's just 2 weeks away from nuclear weapons. I mean, I would argue that whatever, they probably already have them, but that's what he said. Now, why is this important? Because the IAEA's Board of Governors are supposed to meet, I think, either next week or the week after next. And there have already been in March, they met in their last meeting, where Grossi had basically the same report of Iranian noncompliance with IAEA limitations on their nuclear operations, the massive enrichment of uranium that placed them, a stone throw or a turn of the screw away from a nuclear arsenal, so that they are a threshold nuclear state. And at that time, the United States blocked a censure of Iran by the Board of Governors because they said that they wanted to avoid a larger conflict. And if they did this, then Iran would use it as a justification for testing a nuclear weapon, or announcing that they were developing nuclear weapons, or whatever it may be. So it was more like a way to kick the can down the alleyway for another 2 months. Now, again, they're coming to it. And according to one report that I read, the Europeans, again, just as it was the case in March, they wanted to censure Iran, and the Biden administration didn't. And so the Biden administration was able to convince the Europeans not to move forward with a censure of Iran, which, of course, is obviously not only justified but required here, and that they're expected to do the same thing now, that the Biden administration is expected again to shield Iran from censure for their illicit nuclear weapons program that is on the verge of completion. And the question is why, right? Well, I mean, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, just to round that out, this weekend we got confirmed reports that Brett McGurk, the White House envoy for the Middle East, the National Security Council, so Jake Sullivan's guy, and what's his name? Abram Paley, who is acting U.S. envoy to Iran, who replaced Robert Malley, who's now under FBI investigation for, misuse of classified information. So Abram Paley and Brett McGurk went to Oman and carried out talks with Iranian officials and direct, who cares? So they met with them, and the idea was that, and what there was released there was that they wanted to try to chill things down here. But really what we know already from the long 3-year history of the Biden administration is that what they want to do is to cut a deal with Iran. They want to reach a compromise with Iran that will bring them closer to Iran because that's their ultimate goal. They want to screw Israel, right, and America's other allies in order to advance Obama's objective of realigning the United States towards the Muslim Brotherhood in Iran, that is Hamas in Iran, and away from Israel at the expense of Israel and the Sunni Arab states that we see what the United States has done to them. And so we're looking at this situation where they are on the verge of making this grand deal with Iran, that if you take what's happening in the north and you make Israel cut a deal with Hezbollah, that will give Hezbollah benefits for their massive aggression against Israel and the endangerment of the entire northern region of Israel on the one hand, and you force Israel to capitulate to Hamas in the south and pave the way for the establishment of a Palestinian state that is controlled by Hamas, just as Lebanon is controlled by Hezbollah. And then you do that on the American side, and the Iranians either agree not to go public with their nuclear arsenal until after November, or, Iran, I think that's basically what it is. But it's not that Iran is blocked in its nuclear path. It's not going to be contained. It's just a matter of securing the democratic victory in November by not outing its nuclear weapons arsenal, and in exchange, the United States is going to force Israel to capitulate in this war. So I think that's basically the deal that they're striking with the Iranians. It's certainly one is reflected in American policy on the ground in Israel, particularly with its hysterical effort, really, to undermine with the goal of overthrowing as quickly as possible Prime Minister Netanyahu from power. So is this going to work? Again, it's really interesting because I keep coming back to this question at the end of every In Focus. At least that's how I feel for the past couple of weeks when I'm talking about how the United States is seeking to overthrow the Israeli government. They just don't get Israel. And by the way, they don't get the Palestinians either. If they keep saying in Washington that Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinian people, but everywhere that our forces have been in Gaza indicates that the opposite is true. It's not that Hamas has forced itself on the Palestinians. It's the Palestinians created Hamas because it's a reflection of who they are. They're a genocidal people directed as a people towards the goal of annihilating the Jews. And we saw that very clearly on October 7th, obviously. So that's where they're directed. That's where they've always been directed. And, since well before Israel was founded. And so, this is an organic expression of the will of the Palestinian people. And the United States has constantly ignored that. So the idea that you're going to get a ceasefire that's going to be stable in any form by giving Hamas this victory is insane. They're not going to be sitting quietly. They're going to be triumphant, and they're going to be celebrating their incredible victory for their jihad against the Jews. So that's one thing. It's just not going to work. And the other thing that's not going to work is that they're not going to get Israel to capitulate. I mean, Benny Gantz, they had another poll this week in Channel 14 that showed that Benny Gantz is now, trailing Netanyahu by 9 points in public approval, and that his party is trailing Likud by 5 mandates in the Knesset, 25 to Likud to 20 for Gantz. And, if he leaves the government, then he loses his position as a centrist, because now he's just doing the Americans' bidding and he's advancing the policies of the radical left. And when you add to that the fact that Avigdor Lieberman and his party won't join Gantz-led party today, Gantz I mean, Lieberman thinks that he can come in as a spoiler and take whatever right-wing mandates may be sort of parked with Gantz because he's in the government, and they'll move to Lieberman because Lieberman wants victory and Gantz is preaching capitulation. So, like, because the Israeli people don't want to capitulate. You know, Amit Segal, the sort of top political commentator in Israel, he said last night following Gantz's press conference, he said, you know, it's very strange because Gantz, like the Americans, because it's really, I mean, again, I think that his whole speech was written by the Americans. I think everything that he says is either aligned with the Americans or written by the Americans, but whatever. He constantly refers to the government of Israel, particularly the two smaller, more ideological parties on the right, the Jewish Power Party led by Itamar Ben-Gvir and the Religious Zionism Party led by Bezalel Smotrich, as fringe parties. But they have more mandates than Benny Gantz does. And moreover, their positions are supported by a much larger percentage of the Israeli people than Gantz's positions, his capitulationist positions are. So that the marginal actor here, oddly, given that he's the one who has two people who are in the war cabinet and they, who represent a much larger group of Israelis, have no representative on the war cabinet, right? But he is the marginal force in politics in Israel, and they are not. And so, you know, when you take that into account, and you take into account the incredible backlash that Gallant faced after he made a statement last Monday that, you know, you have 73% of right-wing voters who are demanding that, or who told posters for Channel 14 that they want Gallant fired. They want Netanyahu to fire him from his position as defense minister. And you have a situation where the Americans, again, are just reading the situation wrong. You know, they will get their anarchists to massively increase their civil disobedience. But they're not going to be met with a fearful public or a public who thinks that they have a point. They're going to be met with a public that has absolutely no patience for their nonsense. And it's a different situation. Back last year when these people were lighting the country on fire, I think that most Israelis were confused about what was going on. You had wall-to-wall coverage by the media saying that Bibi was evil, that he wants to be a tyrant, that he wants to be a dictator or whatever. And even if people didn't think it was true, they didn't really understand it. It was too esoteric for them to get. And you had this incredibly sympathetic coverage all the time, saturation from all of the media outlets almost, on behalf of these anarchists that were lighting Israel on fire and having general strikes and all of the rest of it. But now, you know, everybody understands what the stakes are. We all lived through October 7th. And we've all, you know, been engaged very deeply in what's happening in our country ever since. And they just aren't going to be met with the same public that greeted them with suspicion, but not with rejection in 2023. And so I think that Biden doesn't get it at all, and the government may fall, and that'll make it'll make things more difficult politically to proceed with the war. But I think that the overwhelming majority of the public will reward Netanyahu for staying the course. His chances of reelection will be higher. The chance that he'll have defectors in the Likud will be smaller, and the government will survive. And, you know, it'll happen slowly. I'm not sure what's going to happen with the North, honestly. I mean, not only Zaytun's report, but other indicators that I've been receiving from people, and particularly the weapons embargo that Biden has effected against Israel, both declaratively and also on the ground in many respects, makes us question, you know, like, are we going to be in a position even to carry out this war that we need to carry out in the North? And we have to fight. We probably need many of the forces that are now in Gaza in the North in order to do it. So it's a very delicate thing that's going to take a long time to undertake. So I think that what we're looking at is a prolonged conflict of everybody, not everybody, but, you know, the vast majority of Israelis are praying that Trump gets elected in November, and that we'll have a very different policy emanating from Washington in January, and we want to have a leader in place in Israel under both circumstances that's either going to be able to stand up to American pressure or make the most of a friendly U.S. administration at this time. So I think that what we're going to see is the war being dragged out. I think you're going to see plotting, movement and advancement of our forces in Gaza. It's going to be hard. You're going to see an increased movement of forces from Gaza to the north as we get ready to deal with Hezbollah in a more serious way. But, I'm not really sure. I mean, we have until January, we're going to have the administration in power at a minimum, no matter what happens in the election. That's a very long time from now. And that's 8 months. And a lot can happen in 8 months. Look at how much has happened in 7 months since October 7th. And, it's anybody's guess how things can go. But I don't think that Gallant's challenge that's now been joined by Gantz and Jake Sullivan's appearance here in Israel will overthrow the government. I don't think that that's going to happen. And I think that so long as the government is in power, no matter what else happens on the ground, Israel is going to stay the course. Whether more quickly or more slowly is an open question, but my money is on the more slowly, but that will proceed because we don't have any other choice. So those are my thoughts for now. I'm flying off to the United States tonight, and I'll see you from there. Take care. Bye-bye.